Right, can we now start with questions to Secretary of State for Wales, Sandra Rosner? Not here. Well, is there a link question if the Secretary of State can do that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I answer that, may I fully support your ruling, but of course, may I, however, send my deepest condolences to the relatives of all those who have died in prison. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 1, 6 and 9 together. And may I make absolutely clear that I and Conservative MPs and Senate members and councillors are, of course, supportive of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in certain areas, such as outside schools or hospitals or old people's homes or anywhere where there are vulnerable pedestrians. But the blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit has had a detrimental effect on road users, on users of public transport and on businesses across Wales. And I would call on the Welsh Labour Government to think again.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his answer. Clearly, there's a strong case for 20-mile-an-hour limits outside schools, in shopping areas and other areas where there's huge pedestrian activity. But a blanket ban is outrageous. Has my right honourable friend any detail as the cost to the Welsh economy of this extremely damaging move, and indeed the cost of implementing it across Wales in such a blanket fashion?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that the vast majority of 30-mile-an-hour roads are now 20-mile-an-hour. I've seen that figure suggesting it's around 96%. Mr. Speaker, it is a blanket ban on 30-mile-an-hour roads, and that's exactly what the Welsh Labour Government put out there. And I can give the honourable gentleman an indication of the costs, because the Welsh Government's own impact assessment suggested that this would cause a £4.5 billion hit to the Welsh economy, and on top of that, taxpayers have had to pay £30 million for 20-mile-an-hour road signs.
Dr. Luke Evans.
This is really concerning, and I note that almost 500,000 people signed the Senate's petition, the highest ever number of people signing up, because they're so concerned about the impact this will have. It cost £33 million to implement, and now is estimated an extra £5 million to unwind the changes. What conversations is he having with the Welsh Government to ensure policies like this don't get in place again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we certainly don't want policies like this, and of course there is an anti-motorist agenda with the Welsh Labour Government that includes not only 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, Mr. Speaker, but we've seen legislation to bring in tolls on the M4, we've seen a ban on any major new road projects being built, we've even had Monmouthshire Labour Council suggesting that they might want to campaign to bring back 7 bridge tolls. So, Mr. Speaker, the lesson is that if you support motorists, if you support the right to drive a car, then vote Conservative at the next general election.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you. When it comes to this logical or illogical decision, does the Minister think that, or what does the Minister think in relation to pursuing a 20-mile-per-hour limit outside schools that the general public quite clearly don't want? Is there a lesson to be learned for government, whether it be in Wales or elsewhere, to pursue something that the people, the general public, wish not have at all?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for that question? He raises a very good point, because this was clearly done against the wishes of almost 500,000 people, a record number of people who signed a petition on this matter. And, Mr. Speaker, the most recent announcement from the Welsh Government, where they talked about possibly doing a screeching U-turn on this policy, suggests to me that they're more interested at the moment in perhaps deflecting national press attention from the scandal involving the Welsh Labour Government in Cardiff Bay at the moment.
Shannon Secretary of State Jo Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to acknowledge the 25th anniversary this week of Welsh devolution, delivered by a Labour government. It's helped nurture a confident, modern and outward-looking Wales, and we on this side of the House are proud of it. Mr. Speaker, not a single one of the honourable members who have raised questions on this issue lives in Wales. And the speed limit is not blanket, as the Secretary of State well knows. It's a bit like the Conservative councillor in Sunderland who set up the anti-20 miles per hour Facebook groups whilst campaigning for it in his own area. Meanwhile, a mother whose 11-year-old son was hit by a car near his school in Flintshire has said that the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit likely saved his life. So does he agree that this intervention represents an important endorsement of the Welsh Labour Government's policy to protect lives, especially children's lives?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I also can I also acknowledge the 25th anniversary of devolution? We were promised that it was going to deliver better schools and hospitals and public standards, and what we actually have are the longest waiting lists in the United Kingdom, the worst educational standards in the United Kingdom, and a First Minister who's willing to take £200,000 in a donation from a twice-convicted criminal. Mr. Speaker, that is the record of 25 years of Labour running a government in Wales. And as far as 20-mile-an-hour limits are concerned, I said straight away, Mr. Speaker, I'm in favour of them outside schools, hospitals and other places where there are vulnerable pedestrians. I don't like the blanket ban, which has been imposed as part of the anti-motorist agenda of the Welsh Labour Government.
Joe Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, it is literally rich of honourable members opposite to be chuntering about donations. How much of Mr Frank Hester's millions is bankrolling his general election campaign, a man who said that a black woman MP in this chamber should be shot? On the issue of roads, Mr Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with his own association deputy chairman writing in Conservative Home this week, who describes politics in Wales as a cul-de-sac for the Tory party? The Welsh public don't like divisive politics. They don't like Wales being constantly talked down by his party. And is that why the Tories haven't won a domestic election in Wales for over a century?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just remind the honourable lady, we just actually got more votes than the Labour Party in my own constituency of Monmouth in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. And the fact of the matter is, what people in Wales want, Mr. Speaker, is public services that match what is being delivered by this Conservative government in England. What people want, Mr. Speaker, is waiting lists that are the same as what is being delivered in England, education standards that are the same, and standards in public life that reflect what we expect from members of Parliament in the United Kingdom. And that's not what we're getting under this Welsh Labour government.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Water is a devolved matter in Wales, and therefore rivers and streams in Wales are the responsibility of the Welsh Government. The UK Government recognises that rivers are an essential part of our natural environment, and that is why we are working on the UK National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, won't the Minister fess up to the fact that the real scandal in Wales is that this government keeps denigrating a good Welsh government that in terms of biodiversity and so much else is better than what's happening in the rest of the UK. On biodiversity, 3 times better than England. Isn't it about time we got a few Welsh ideas and Welsh leaders to help us clean up our act and our rivers?
Well, that was a good attempt, Mr. Speaker, but I simply cannot disagree with the honourable gentleman more. It is this government that has forced the water companies to provide £56 billion towards investment in the storm overflow network, improving water quality across England. But in Wales, the picture could not be more different. The average number of sewage spills per outflow is 38. In England, it's 23. Our record speaks for itself.
Chair of the Select Committee, Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And firstly, thank you for clarifying the sub judice rules in relation to Park Prison. I think MPs across South Wales were disappointed that the urgent question was declined yesterday, but we understand why, and we will continue to seek answers and to scrutinise the Minister over the deeply distressing events that are happening right now and the way that prison is being run. On the subject of pollution, thousands of Pembrokeshire residents continue to have their lives blighted by air pollution and fears about water pollution from the Withyhedge landfill site. Given that the ministers in Wales responsible for overseeing the public health and the environmental regulatory response both voted last week to block an independent investigation into the financial dealings between the owner of that site and the First Minister, how on earth can my constituents have confidence that their concerns will be addressed impartially and the problems resolved?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend lives this issue on a daily basis, and I commend him for highlighting the plight of his constituents who have to endure the impact of this devastating environmental pollution. Mr. Speaker, any way you look at it, this donation stinks. And I think it is shameful that the Welsh Government are evading scrutiny on this issue. It is simply his constituents can have no confidence that this matter will be investigated. There is no independent scrutiny here, and I think Labour members opposite should explain why they are scared of scrutiny on this.
Liz Twist.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 3, 8 and 12 together. The UK Government fully recognises the challenges posed by cost of living pressures that have come about as a result of COVID and the invasion of Ukraine, which is why it is committed to the triple lock on pensions for this Parliament, increase the living wage benefiting 140,000 people in Wales, and put an average of £700 back into the pocket of a typical worker in Wales through national insurance cuts.
This twist.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Trussell Trust says that 1/5 of people in Wales have cut back on or skipped meals in the last 12 months. What conversations is the Minister having with supermarkets about holding down the cost of food for customers?
Well, Mr Speaker, I know that many supermarkets are indeed supporting food banks within their local areas, and the UK Government have certainly wanted to support those with the least by making sure that pensions, that benefits at the minimum wage all go up in line with inflation, and to make extra payments on top to pensioners, to those on benefits and to households where there is disability. But if the Honourable Lady is truly concerned about cost of living pressures in Wales, perhaps she ought to be asking her colleagues in the Welsh Labour Government why on this very day Welsh Labour ministers are supporting a plan to create dozens of extra Senedd members at a cost of £120 million, all money which could be far better spent on supporting those with the least.
David.
Is the Secretary of State aware of a study by a Citizens Advice Company which indicates that over 500,000 people in Wales are struggling to make ends meet? If he's aware about, what's he doing about it?
Well, Mr Speaker, I've already outlined the extra payments that are being made to pensioners, the benefits to those on disability, the fact that pensions, benefits and the minimum wage have all gone up in line with inflation. And on top of that, the UK Government have been delivering 5 towns funds, 4 growth deals, 3 rounds of levelling up funding, 2 investment zones, 2 free ports, an electric arc furnace in South Wales, an electrified rail line in North Wales. And what are we getting from the Welsh Labour Government, Mr Speaker? We're getting £120 million being spent on extra Senedd members. While we level up the economy, they want to level up the number of politicians in Cardiff Bay.
Patrick Ready.
Mr Speaker, he mentioned Ukraine and COVID as contributing factors to the cost of living crisis. He forgot to mention Brexit. Or is he going to try to argue that Brexit has somehow improved things and made goods and services cheaper for people in Wales?
Mr Speaker, I'd be only too delighted to mention Brexit, which was voted for by a majority in the United Kingdom and a majority in Wales, and point out to the honourable gentleman that since Brexit, the UK has actually grown faster than France and Germany. I could also go on to mention, Mr Speaker, wasting money on Scottish embassies all around the world, trying to build ferries that haven't yet been floated anywhere, raising taxes and trying to shut down the oil and gas industry in Scotland as measures which are unlikely to support cost of living pressures in Scotland.
Sarah Atherton.
Yeah, the Development Bank of Wales is supposed to be aiding businesses through cost of living pressures. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's unacceptable that one company received $400,000 from the bank, was then able to give the First Minister of Wales £200,000?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises a very interesting point here. The Development Bank of Wales, which is owned ultimately by the Welsh taxpayers, should be there to support businesses through cost of living pressures. It was able to make a £400,000 loan to a company which was then able to turn round and had £200,000 back in a political donation to enable the First Minister to win the Wales election campaign. Mr Speaker, it's a very good question. It's not a question for me, it's one that should be answered by the shadow front bench. But on this matter, Mr Speaker, they have been very silent indeed.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Small businesses, particularly those in retail and hospitality, are directly affected by cost of living challenges that come from the outcome of COVID and the energy price spike from the Ukraine conflict. Therefore, the Chancellor has introduced a 75% business rate relief scheme in England that is supporting businesses in England. Does he share my concern that that funding is not being used to the same degree in Wales, and the business rates in Wales are only being relieved to the rate of 40% and are paying more in tax?
Mr Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. The UK Government made certain that the money for the business rate discount was passed on to the Welsh Labour Government. And instead of passing it on to the pubs and restaurants and small businesses that are so vital to communities in Wales, they've decided to spend it on other matters, such as the one they're voting on today. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, the average pub in Wales is paying thousands more in business rates than a pub just across the border in England. It is absolutely scandalous, and I would urge the Welsh Labour Government to think about where their priorities are.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. No contrition then in any of those answers from the Secretary of State, whose party has piled, on average, £960 extra on the tax bills for around 400,000 pensioners in Wales by freezing tax thresholds. The Prime Minister has now made a totally unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance. So will the Minister tell us how on earth they're going to pay for it, and will he rule out an 8p rise in income tax or scrapping winter fuel payments to do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we made it very clear that we want to keep the triple lock, to continue to ensure that pensions increase in line with inflation. And we're going to afford to do that, Mr. Speaker, by making sure we get growth in the economy, which is why we wanted to end the double taxation system of making those in work pay extra money through national insurance tax. We've also made very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we will only make tax cuts when we afford them, because on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we don't believe in making unfunded promises in order to try and buy votes.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
More than 1 in 4 children in Wales lives in poverty. Devolution has the capacity to transform people's lives, but the current First Minister is distracted with questions about his integrity, deleting messages and taking dodgy donations. 25 years since the start of devolution, does the Secretary of State agree with me that governments at both ends of the N4 need to recommit to integrity and transparency?
Speaker, I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady that this government and this political party are completely committed towards integrity. And I think it's high time... Oh, Mr. Speaker, they're laughing, Mr. Speaker. Their own First Minister took £200,000 from a convicted criminal. A convicted criminal who received £400,000 from a bank for which he was responsible, went in front of the COVID committee and said that all the messages on his phone had been accidentally deleted by the IT department, but now we see a screenshot where he urges people to delete their messages so they can't be FOI'd, and they have the audacity to sit there laughing when people ask questions about standards. So the Honourable Lady, I say the Honourable Lady makes a very good point. Let's collapse the coalition and stop supporting the Welsh Labour Government, and then we can get a decent government with decent values running Wales.
Saville-Roberts.
My party seeks to make a difference to the lives of the people of Wales, but when it comes to the Secretary of State's judgment in relation to the First Minister, yes, we are for once in agreement. But this screams hypocrisy. The Tories in the Senedd voted against a Plaid Cymru motion to set a cap on political donations. His party has still not returned a £10 million donation from a man who made racist and misogynistic remarks. In that spirit of open democracy, will the Secretary of State support a cap on donations to political parties?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to sit here and start making up policy on the hoof, but what I would say to the Honourable Lady, and I think she'd agree with this, is that I would not have taken hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations from somebody who'd been convicted twice of environmental offences. And if the Labour Party are happy with that, that is a matter for them, Mr. Speaker.
Slip down.
A 4, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I thank my right honourable friend for his work as chair of the Environmental Audit Committee. The UK Government's River Wye Action Plan will halt ongoing decline of the River Wye to preserve and restore this treasured river to the rating of favourable condition.
As the Minister's already said, the environment is a devolved matter, but nobody seems to have told the River Wye, which rises in Wales and crosses the border to emerge into the River Severn in England. I very much welcome the River Wye Action Plan, which DEFRA has announced recently. Has my honourable friend seen any action taken by the Welsh Government to match the UK Government's commitment to clean up the polluted River Wye?
In the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a very short answer. No. The Welsh Government has failed to come to the table time and time again on this issue, which is close to my heart as a constituency MP for the River Wye itself. That has been the missing piece of the puzzle, and that is why we are seeing no action in Wales.
Teresa Villiers.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, healthcare is devolved to the Welsh Government, who have received record levels of funding to deliver on all their devolved responsibilities, receiving 20% more funding per person than in England.
Teresa Millett.
So many people in Wales are waiting longer for NHS care than they are in England. And in a 12-month period, 40,000 people had to go from Wales to England for elective care. Doesn't it show that Labour claims to be better for the NHS are completely false?
Yeah.
My right honourable friend is entirely right. The NHS is not safe under Labour's hands, and we have living proof of that in Wales. I think it is a great shame that when the Secretary of State for Health in England offered the support of the NHS in England to alleviate pressures on waiting times in Wales, the Welsh Health Secretary turned that down. That is Labour's record on the NHS.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems a lot of my constituents have raised with me is that when they do get a letter calling them for an appointment, including ones where they've been waiting for some time, the letter arrives after the appointment date because the Royal Mail is now delivering such an appalling service. Isn't it time we really had a strong word to make sure that people who are being called for appointments get a chance to turn up to them because they've actually had the letter on time?
The right honourable gentleman makes a good point, one which I will certainly investigate with colleagues, but I think the problem lies with the mismanagement of the Welsh NHS, for which his party must take responsibility.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government recognises the importance of victims having access to the support they need to recover from the impact of crime. That is why we are quadrupling funding for victim services, up from £41 million in 2010.
Mr. Speaker, as a recent victim of crime, the impact on the victim makes you reflect on the impact on the victim, but also on how many crimes remain unresolved. Latest figures show that 9 in 10 crimes in Wales went unsolved in the last 6 months. So what can the Minister say to the victims of the 82,000 reported crimes that went uncharged last year?
Can I firstly say how sorry I am to learn that the Honourable Lady has been a victim of crime. I know the experience she's gone through, and I personally send her my huge sympathies. This government has a proud record in delivering on victims of crime, whether that's new pieces of legislation or the record headcount of police officers. Unfortunately, it was the Welsh Government who chose to reduce the numbers of police community support officers last year, which is having an impact on victims of crime.
Jones. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that we are all victims when senior Labour politicians make false and misleading statements at public inquiries?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It is deeply concerning that a First Minister should reveal himself to have acted in such a way which appears to be entirely contrary. I look forward to Welsh Labour members looking for further scrutiny on that issue.
Matt Weston. Stay.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 10 and 11 together. I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of subjects, including steelmaking in Wales. The Government is investing £500 million to retain steelmaking at Port Talbot, and not only in Port Talbot, actually, but at other Tata sites, including Llanwern and Shotton, protecting 5,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain whilst increasing our economic security. And at the same time, the Government have put aside £80 million for the Transition Board to spend supporting anyone who loses their job in Port Talbot and the wider community.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it be the transmission pylons and lines to upgrade our power grid as demanded by the Windsor report, or the prospect of building steel-based offshore wind platforms, the Welsh steel industry can and should be central to our transition to a net zero nation. When historic investments are being made by European competitors in green steel, does the Minister recognise that it is the Government's lack of ambition for Britain that has let thousands of skilled workers down?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a good point about the importance of making sure there's a grid connection to enable an electric arc furnace to work properly. And I've raised this issue with National Grid, and they've assured me that the grid connection can be made on time. He makes a second reasonable point about the importance of being able to use steel produced in Port Talbot for floating offshore wind turbines. That is not the case at the moment because, as some of his shadow frontbenchers seem to be unaware of, the steel made in Port Talbot is coil, which is too thin to make floating offshore wind turbines. The honourable gentleman will be pleased to know that there are discussions going on with one major investor to try and ensure that the steel produced from the arc furnace can be made in a way that could support floating offshore wind structures.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sustainability of domestic automotive manufacturing is vital to the future prosperity of Luton's local economy. So what discussions has the Minister had with the UK's automotive industry about the effect of losing our sovereign virgin steel production on their supply chain costs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've had a number of discussions. Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with the automotive industry. I've also had regular discussions with the steel industry across the United Kingdom. 90% of the grades that are currently produced by Port Talbot can be produced using an electric arc furnace. And there is work going on to ensure that the other 10% can be. But can I just remind the honourable lady that we actually have a plan for Port Talbot. When Tata came to us, they were looking to close down Port Talbot, to pull out of the United Kingdom, and it's a move that would have cost 8,000 jobs and 12,500 in the wider supply chain. As a result of that, the UK Conservative government stepped forward with £500 million of investment to support an electric arc furnace and a further £80 million to support retraining workers and to support infrastructure improvements in Port Talbot. We have had not one single penny from the Welsh Labour Government, who instead have decided today to prioritise spending £120 million on more Senedd members. More Senedd members or support for steelworkers. I know what my priority is, Mr. Speaker.
We know